My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a senior project coordinator for a civil engineering firm in Columbus, Ohio. On Thursday, April 17th, at exactly 3:42 p.m., I slipped a brass house key tied with a faded blue ribbon into my coat pocket after signing the closing documents for my very first home. That ribbon had once wrapped a birthday gift from my grandfather nearly 20 years earlier. He had quietly saved $18 for $100 over 7 years to help with my down payment, refusing every attempt I made to pay him back. Less than 24 hours later, one phone call unraveled everything we'd worked toward. Months afterward, I would find that same blue ribbon key resting alone on my front porch, and for a long time I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. Here's what I didn't understand that afternoon, and what would only become clear after everything fell apart. My parents weren't furious because I had bought a house without telling them. They were furious because, in their minds, I had unknowingly destroyed a future they had already planned, one where my savings, my salary, and eventually even my home would belong to their vision instead of mine. Growing up, my family never ranked people by kindness, education, or even happiness. We ranked them by houses. Every Thanksgiving, my father found a reason to compare square footage. Every Christmas, my mother commented on kitchens, neighborhoods, and property values as though they measured a person's worth. The biggest home always belonged to the most respected member of the family. The smallest belonged to whoever had somehow disappointed everyone else. The blue ribbon became my own quiet reminder that life didn't have to work that way. My grandfather, Walter, kept it tied around random things simply because he liked how cheerful it looked. He tied it around tomato plants in his garden, around old toolboxes, around birthday cards. When he handed me the money for my down payment, he wrapped the cashier's check with that same faded ribbon and smiled. "This isn't buying you a house," he told me. "It's buying you somewhere no one else gets to own." At the time, I smiled without really understanding what he meant. The uncomfortable truth is that I wasn't only someone my parents controlled. For years, I helped normalize it. When my older brother Daniel received help with his first condo while I was expected to figure things out, I convinced myself it was because he had children. When my parents insisted every major purchase should be discussed with them first, I called it respect instead of control. When relatives joked that my paycheck was the family's backup retirement account, I laughed right alongside everyone else. Looking back now, every laugh cost me something. By the time I finally qualified for a $312,000 mortgage, I had become almost obsessive about documenting everything. My realtor, Monica Hayes, knew I wanted complete privacy. My lender confirmed every document through my personal email. My attorney emailed every closing schedule directly to me. Even my best friend, Nina, joked that I treated buying a house like planning a classified government operation. Still, there was one conversation I couldn't forget. 3 weeks before closing, we were finishing dinner at my parents' house when my mother casually looked across the table and said, almost absent-mindedly, "Family decisions belong to the family." Nobody reacted. Daniel kept eating. Dad nodded once. I smiled politely and changed the subject, assuming it was another one of those harmless family sayings that sounded far more important than it really was. I had no idea it was a warning. Closing day felt strangely ordinary. At 10:15 a.m. on Thursday, April 17, I signed the final page. Monica slid the folder toward me, smiled, and said, "Congratulations, homeowner." Grandpa Walter didn't clap or make a speech. He simply reached into his shirt pocket, took out the brass key tied with the faded blue ribbon, and placed it in my hand. "I think it belongs to you now." We spent the next 2 hours carrying in the first boxes. There wasn't much: 2 bookshelves, 6 labeled storage bins, an old oak dining table I had refinished myself, and the coffee maker Grandpa insisted every house needed before anything else. The rooms echoed because they were mostly empty. I remember standing in the living room thinking how peaceful an unfinished home could feel. At exactly 7:18 p.m. Friday evening, that peace disappeared. My phone buzzed while Grandpa was carefully measuring where my grandmother's old wall clock should hang. The screen showed one message from my mother. "Mom, 7:18 p.m. Asterisk, is it true you bought a house? Asterisk. My stomach tightened. Before I could answer, another message arrived. Asterisk, your cousin Melissa just posted congratulations on Facebook. Call us. Now. Asterisk. I hadn't even remembered Melissa had taken a picture outside the title office. She had uploaded it with a simple caption. So proud of Claire. First-time homeowner. I looked across the room. Grandpa was smiling as he adjusted the clock until it sat perfectly level above the fireplace. Behind him stood unopened boxes labeled kitchen, office, and books. Everything we'd spent years working toward was sitting quietly in that room. Then my phone rang. Dad. I answered. He didn't ask how the closing went. He didn't congratulate me. His first sentence was the one I'd heard for years. Family decisions belong to the family. His voice remained calm. That almost made it worse. I explained that I had purchased the home myself, qualified for the mortgage myself, and hadn't wanted to burden anyone with the process. There was a long silence. Then my mother took the phone. You actually did it. I frowned. Did what? You spent your savings. Yes, on my house. Another silence. Finally, Dad spoke again. You've ruined everything. I honestly thought he meant I had hurt their feelings. I couldn't have been more wrong. He explained that for almost a year they had been planning to sell their current house and combine finances with Daniel to purchase a much larger property, something around $850,000 with a finished basement and an in-law suite. My contribution had already been included in their calculations. Not because they had asked. Because they had assumed. My savings. My annual bonus. Even the promotion I'd received 6 months earlier. In their minds, all of it belonged to the family's future plan. You were always supposed to help, my mother said quietly. I leaned against the kitchen counter, suddenly feeling as though the room had shifted beneath me. No one ever told me there was a plan. We didn't think we had to. Dad repeated the phrase again, slower this time. Family decisions belong to the family. Across the room, Grandpa had stopped hanging the clock. He wasn't crying. He didn't interrupt. He simply folded the measuring tape, placed it carefully back into his toolbox, and sat down on one unopened moving box. His shoulders lowered just slightly. That quiet acceptance hurt more than any shouting could have. As I looked at him, memories began lining up with uncomfortable clarity. Every holiday where my paycheck became dinner conversation, every joke about me funding future plans, every time I had convinced myself they were only being protective. The hardest realization wasn't that my parents had made plans without me. It was that I had spent years helping them believe they had every right to. That night, after Grandpa went home, I sat alone on the hardwood floor with nothing but a folding chair, a lamp, and my phone lighting the room. I wanted someone to tell me I wasn't overreacting. Instead, I found people who had spent years helping keep the same system alive. The first person I called was my Aunt Susan. She listened quietly while I explained everything from the Facebook post to my parents' secret plan for my savings. When I finished, she sighed. Claire, you know how your parents are. I do. They're just shocked. They probably assumed you'd want to stay close to family. They assumed they'd already spent money I hadn't agreed to give. There was another pause. I wouldn't make this a thing, she finally said. Call your mother tomorrow. It'll settle down. Don't make it a thing. I thanked her for listening, hung up, and realized she hadn't disagreed with my parents once. She had only asked me to become smaller. Next, I called Daniel. My older brother had always been the favorite, though I'd spent years pretending that wasn't true. Dad admired the way he talked in business meetings. Mom adored his children. Every family gathering somehow revolved around whatever Daniel needed next. Surely, he would understand that our parents had crossed a line. Instead, he laughed softly. You really bought a whole house without mentioning it? Yes. I can see why they're upset. I didn't owe anyone permission. No, he admitted, but you could have avoided all this. So I should apologize? I'm saying sometimes keeping peace matters more than being right. His words landed harder than he probably intended. Keeping peace. That had quietly become my full-time job long before I realized I had accepted it. After we hung up, I stared at the brass key resting on the kitchen counter. The faded blue ribbon looked almost gray beneath the overhead light. Suddenly, dozens of old memories fit together differently. When my college graduation gift mysteriously became helping Daniel with the baby. When my promotion dinner was moved because Daniel had a golf tournament. When Mom asked how much my annual bonus was before asking whether I enjoyed the new position. None of those moments had seemed important alone. Together they painted a picture I had spent years refusing to see. The truth settled over me with surprising calm. I wasn't only someone they had controlled. I had helped make their expectations feel normal. Every time I stayed quiet to avoid conflict. Every time I laughed at jokes about my paycheck. Every time I accepted being consulted last, but expected to contribute first. I had reinforced the very system that now felt impossible to escape. Around 9:40 p.m., my phone rang one more time. "Grandpa. I hope I didn't wake you," he said. "You didn't." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, "Are you sitting in your own house?" I looked around the quiet living room. The walls were still bare. Half the boxes were unopened. The clock finally hung above the fireplace. "I am." "Good." Another gentle silence followed. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "You don't need permission to live your own life." No speeches. No anger. No advice about fighting harder. Just permission. Something I hadn't realized I'd been waiting 34 years to hear. That was the moment I stopped trying to win a place inside the family system I had inherited. Instead, I decided I would build a home where love wasn't measured by obedience, and where the front door would only ever open with the people I chose to welcome inside. The guest room stayed empty. Even then, I quietly made the bed and left a fresh towel folded on the dresser. Not because my parents had earned the space, but because I wanted my decisions to be guided by generosity instead of fear. The next morning, I decided my parents deserved one final opportunity to meet me halfway. Not because they were entitled to one. Because I wanted to know, years from now, that I had exhausted every reasonable path before walking away. At 8:12 a.m. on Saturday, I sent a simple email. I offered to help them research smaller homes if they still wanted to downsize. I promised that if either of them ever faced a medical emergency, my guest room would always be available. I even suggested sitting down with a financial planner together so everyone could discuss expectations openly instead of making assumptions. There were no accusations. No mention of Facebook. No complaints about the secret plan. Just practical solutions. Their reply arrived exactly 46 minutes later. My mother's email contained only 3 sentences. "If you love this family, you never would have bought that house alone. You're embarrassing us in front of everyone. Asterisk family decisions belong to the family." Asterisk. Dad added a single forwarded message underneath. Asterisk, if you insist on doing this your way, don't expect us to defend your choices when people ask questions. Asterisk. There it was. Not disappointment. Not concern. Reputation. Control. Guilt. Every compromise I had offered required them to see me as an independent adult. Every demand they made required me to remain a child. I closed my laptop without answering. For nearly an hour, I drafted responses I never sent. The first read. Asterisk, you don't get to spend money that was never yours. Asterisk. Delete. The second was harsher. Asterisk, if your retirement plan depended on stealing my future, it was never a plan. Asterisk. Delete. Neither message would change anything. They would only satisfy 5 minutes of anger. Instead, at 10:03 a.m., I typed the only response I could live with years later. Asterisk, I love you both, but my home and my finances are my responsibility. I won't argue about a decision that has already been made. My door remains open whenever we're ready to treat one another with mutual respect. I genuinely hope that day comes. Asterisk. I press send. My mother's reply arrived less than 2 minutes later. Asterisk, we'll see how long that attitude lasts. Asterisk. Nothing else. No congratulations. No questions about the neighborhood. No interest in whether I was happy. Just dismissal. Oddly, that message hurt less than everything before it. Because for the first time, I understood the argument had never been about the house. It had been about ownership. 2 weeks later, I hosted my first Sunday lunch. The guest list wasn't impressive. Grandpa Walter. Nina. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who had noticed me struggling with moving boxes and brought over homemade chicken soup on my second night. Nina's husband, Eric. 5 people. 1 slightly crooked dining table. 3 folding chairs borrowed from next door. Someone accidentally burned the dinner rolls. Grandpa laughed so hard he nearly spilled his iced tea. Nobody cared. Halfway through dessert, he stood, holding the brass key with its faded blue ribbon. I have one last housewarming gift. He handed me a small wooden shadow box. Inside was a handwritten note. Every home deserves one key that belongs only to the person who earned it. He carefully placed the ribboned key inside and helped me hang the shadow box beside the front door. Every person who entered would see it. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. A few days later, my cousin Melissa called after attending my parents' formal family dinner. Only 9 people had shown up. She said the table looked beautiful. Fresh flowers. Crystal glasses. Perfect place settings. But conversation never settled. Several guests quietly asked where I was. My parents simply answered that I had chosen other priorities. Melissa didn't argue with them. Instead, she told everyone the truth. That I had bought my first home after years of saving. That Grandpa had helped because he believed independence should be celebrated, not controlled. A surprising number of relatives reached out afterward. Not to gossip. To congratulate me. 3 months later, on a rainy Tuesday evening, my parents appeared unannounced on my front porch. I saw them through the living room window but didn't rush to answer. I finished drying the dishes, folded the kitchen towel, and only then walked to the door. For the first time in my life, they waited on my time instead of expecting mine to bend around theirs. Mom tried guilt. Dad reminded me how much family mattered. Neither argument landed. Finally, after a long silence, my father looked past me into the hallway, noticed the shadow box holding the blue ribbon key, and quietly asked the only honest question he'd spoken in months. When did you stop needing us? I answered carefully. I never stopped needing parents. I stopped needing permission. Then I gave them my only condition. If we're going to rebuild anything, it starts with Grandpa. He deserves an apology for being treated like his kindness was something you could budget. They looked at each other before asking if Walter would speak with them. He agreed. The conversation happened privately in my backyard beneath the old maple tree. I never asked exactly what was said. I only know that all 3 of them came back inside with red eyes, lighter shoulders, and a silence that finally felt peaceful instead of heavy. Today, nearly 18 months have passed. On the first Sunday of every month, whoever wants to come shares lunch at my house. No seating chart. No rankings. No discussions about property values. Just people. My parents come most months now. They bring dessert instead of opinions. One afternoon, as everyone was clearing the table, I watched my mother straighten the blue ribbon inside the shadow box after it had slipped slightly to one side. She didn't say anything. She simply smiled at Grandpa before joining the others in the garden he now helps me care for every spring. He likes to tie faded blue ribbons around the tomato plants, just as he always did. The house cost $312,000. Grandpa helped with $18,400. One brass key changed more than an address ever could. Because a house isn't defined by who expected to own your future, it becomes a home the moment you stop asking permission to unlock your own front door.